time for some GX era again, and time to look at another phenomenal theming which got executed terribly. We're taking a look at the Arcana Force archetype, yes, the archetype based on the Arcana Tarot cards, used by Sayo, which was the main antagonist of GX's Season 2, and appeared briefly in Season 4 in a duel, which is actually my most viewed video on the channel. Please, all of you who actually go to watch that video, please go watch my other videos in the same manner as you do that one, because it would really mean a lot to me, so thank you. And yeah, the archetype itself is based on dualism of the effects of their monsters, as in, when they are summoned, you toss a coin, and based on on what the coin lands onto, the monster gets the appropriate effect. With heads, mostly being the effects you want to actually get, while the tails effects are something which absolutely does not help you, and in fact, it actually goes against the logic of the deck. So anyway. And I should also mention that not every single Arcana card has been adapted into the card game, so before we actually start with the actual analysis, let's take a look at what hasn't been adapted into the games. Okay, so first off, Arcana 2, the High Priestess, is in the form of an anime-exclusive trap card, which was not even used by Sayo. And then Arcana 5, Hierophant, is also an anime-only trap card, but that one is actually used by Sayo. Arcana 8, the Strength, is an anime-only monster. Arcana 9, the Hermit, is not present in any shape or form, nor is Arcana 11, Justice. Arcana 12, the Hanged Man, also known as the first Arcana Force monster ever to grace the anime, and of course the game itself, is also an anime exclusive card. So is Arcana 15, the Devil, and lastly Arcana 16, the Tower, is not present in any shape or form. Same goes for Arcana 17, the Star, Arcana 19, the Sun, and Arcana 20, the Judgment. So anyway, with that out of the way, let's take a look at one of their better monsters, ironically enough, Arcana Force 0, the Fool. This is a level 1 fairy with 0 attack and defense, and this card cannot be destroyed by battle. This card cannot change to defense position except with a card effect. When this card is summoned, toss a coin and gain the appropriate effect. If heads, negate your card effects that target this card and destroy them. And tails, negate and destroy your opponent's cards that target this card. So, like I said earlier, the coin toss effect is something that happens with every Arcana Force monster when they are summoned, so instead of reading out how the effect is applied, I will just read out the heads and tails effect from now on. As for the Fool, it's one of the best cards in the archetype simply because it's an indestructible level 1 which can potentially make itself unable to be targeted by card effects. So yeah, it's pretty impressive on how in terms of their what we're starting with. However, the defense position effect only exists as an anime gimmick, and that's it, and you will rarely ever be bothered by that part of the effect, since you will most likely want to set this guy and survive the onslaught that awaits you. And trust me, we will be getting to the onslaught that awaits you if you play this deck for some reason. But anyway, 2 or 3 Fools is what you basically tend to run in your Arcana Force deck. Next up we have Arcana Force 1, the Magician. This is a level 4 with 1100 attack and defense. And heads effect is when a spell card is activated, this card's attack becomes double its original attack until the end phase of this turn. And if tails, when a spell card is activated, your opponent gains 500 life points. Unlike the first effect, the second effect does indeed stack, so if you actually get the tails effect on this one, the opponent might heal himself for quite a significant amount of life points, since spell cards are very much prevalent in the game. And God bless you if you actually get this effect against an Arrow Mage player. And yeah, piss poor attack value for a level 4, but if you actually do get the heads effect, it does have the potential to turn into a level 4 with 2200 attack, which is alright, but considering what you need to get it, it's not the most optimal thing to run. And yeah, the attack values of all Arcana Force monsters, with the exception, well, of course, the Fool, are is that the fact that they are based on their tarot number multiplied by 100 and then increased by 1000. So Arcana Force is the Magician is the first one. So yeah, 1 multiplied by 100 is 1, and plus 1000 it's a 1100. So yeah. As this guy stands right now, if you really have no other better fairy beat sticks to run in the Arcana Force decks, you tend to not run this guy. Anyway, next up we have Arcana Force 3, the Empress. If heads, each time your opponent normal or special or sets a monster, you can special summon one Arcana Force monster from your hand. And if tails, each time your opponent normal or summons or sets a monster, you'd send one card from your hand to the graveyard. Yeah, this card is one of the prime examples of the high risk, high reward ratio, which Arcana forced themselves into with their adaptation into the real game. The first effect is actually magnificent, as it allows you to summon any Arcana Force monster onto the field, including additional copies of itself, and as well their tribute monsters, but we'll get to those. And the Tails effect is just pure disadvantage unless you have some really good tech choices which have all excellent graveyard effects, like if you have a bunch of Trick Clowns or Damage Jugglers in your hand. So yeah, but the fact that the heads effect is so good, running at least 2 or 3 of these is highly recommended if, of course, you're playing an Arcana Force deck in the first place. Next up we have Arcana Force 4, the Emperor. Heads, all Arcana Force monsters gain 500 attack, and tails, all of them lose 500 attack. And yeah, the stat boost is very insignificant since, of course, it raises the stats of the Arcana Force monsters from mediocre to okay, and unless you have like a super consistent way of bringing out all 3 of them with their heads effects applied, I wouldn't recommend this one, and I don't think Infernal Reckless Summon works on it if you apply if the heads effect is applied. So yeah, worth experimenting with, but not recommended in the more competitively oriented builds. Next up we have Arcana Force 6, the Lovers. If heads, this card can be treated as 2 tributes for the tribute summon of our Arcana Force monster, and tails, you cannot tribute Arcana Force monsters at all. Okay, so to get it out of the way, there are 2 Arcana Force monsters that require 2 tributes. Both of them are fairly interesting, and the important thing to note here is that you won't be tribute summoning them at all, so the Lovers is absolutely not worth running, which is an absolute shame. Next up we have Arcana Force 7, the Chariot. If heads, if this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, it gets a Goyo Guardian effect, and if tails, the opponent gets control of the Chariot the moment it's summoned. Okay, so the Goyo Guardian effect on a monster with 1700 attack is very meh when you consider that you need to buff this card up with equips to run over anything relevant, and the Tails effect is the most imbeciling thing I have ever seen on a card. Of course, the anime version was better because the anime version applied when the card was destroyed by battle, and not to mention the coin toss effect was also applied to the opponent, and if the opponent happened to get Tails, you can get the card back. So yeah, the Chariot is very flimsy and not worth running. Next up we have Arcana Force 14, the Temperance. And if heads, the halve all battle damage you take, and if tails, halve all battle damage your opponent takes. And for a level 6 with 2400 attack, this is pretty bog standard as an effect. However, this card with the Fool has a secondary effect which is not related to coin tossing, and that is that during damage calculation in either player's turn you can discard this card and you take no battle damage from that battle. And when this card this just starts off the coin toss effect, and I forgot to stop reading. Anyway, this other effect, which is not related to coin tossing, the hand effect, basically makes Temperance a 3-off staple in the deck, simply because you will always be getting your ass handed to you when playing this deck, because this archetype really has trouble keeping up with their field presence. So Yeah, Temperance is a 3-off, but out of obligation. Next up we have Arcana Force 18 The Moon, their first 2 tribute monster. Now, if heads during your standby phase, you can special summon a Moon token, which is a fairy level 1 light with 0 attack and 0 defense monster, to your field. And if tails, during each of your end phases, select one monster you control and give control of it to your opponent. Okay, so this card is actually fairly interesting for the following reason. First of all, the heads effect special summons tokens, which is tokens are highly appreciated in today's metagame since you need them for link spamming, and their monster, which we'll get to in a minute, highly benefits from this. However, the second effect is very interesting because, yeah, it is you giving your opponents free shit. However, if you actually decide to give the moon to your opponent, the effect will still activate, and the opponent will either have to give it back to you or give you one of their monsters. So yeah, you can basically use the tails effect to basically force the opponent to give you a huge beat stick. Or, you know, to give this thing back to you. Unless, of course, he links it away or tributes it or something else. But yeah, the moon is fairly interesting, and if you're in for a very gimmicky moon deck, then yeah, I would say go nuts if you feel like it. And now for the next monster, I really have no such power to properly announce this card, so I'll just leave it to Sayo himself to announce the next monster we're talking about.
Arcana Force 21, the World Shokan.
Yeah, the Arcana Force 21, the World Zawardo, is pretty magnificent. It's their biggest main deck beat stick of the traditional kind. You'll see what I mean. And yeah, it's a level 8 with 3100 attack and 3100 defense, which is of course very massive. And if heads during your end phase, you can send 2 monsters you control to the graveyard to skip your opponent's next turn. And if tails, during your opponent's draw phase, add the top card of their graveyard to their hand. Okay, so the tails effect is very baffling and very bad, and you will really want to skip over it, but I cannot stress how much I love this card's heads effect. Basically, if you manage to pull it off and have decent swarming capabilities and are able to shit out 2 monsters, 2 easily summonable monsters onto the field each turn, you will get a monster which can skip your opponent's turn on top of a 3100 attack, which is very admirable and beyond massive, like I said, for something you can summon from the main deck. And yeah, this is actually one of the only 3 cards in the entire game that can actively skip your opponent's turn, the other being the 6 Samurai card, support card, the 6 Shinobi, the normal trap, and the other being Stellar Knight Ptolemaeus, which is currently banned, and if you can believe it, it's not even due to the skipping the turn effect, so yeah. And this was actually the first card ever to be able to skip your opponent's turn, and yeah, there are several highly dedicated decks which all revolve around the World Lock, which of course focuses on you skipping the opponent's turn all the single time, so yeah. This is worth running, but not an Arcana Force deck because this card can barely bring it out. So, yeah, if you usually build entire decks around this card. And now for one of their true boss monsters. First off, we have their first level 10 Arcana Force Extra, the Light Ruler. This is the level 10 with 4000 attack and defense, and it cannot be normal summoned or set. It must be special summoned from your hand by sending 3 monsters you control to the graveyard, and cannot be special summoned by other ways. And its heads effect is when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can target 1 card in your graveyard and add it to your hand. And if tails, during either player's turn when a spell or trap or monster effect that targets this card is activated, this card loses exactly 1000 attack and you can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. Yeah, unlike the majority of the archetype, both of the heads and tails effects are actually very good. The heads effect is because you can literally recycle any card from your graveyard back into your hand, which is really nice. and the Tails effect is actually very formidable protection. However, the problem lies in the summoning condition, which requires you to send 3 monsters face up from the field to the graveyard in order for this thing to be brought out. And yeah, like I stated earlier, Arcana Force really have trouble having coherent field presence. So yeah, this thing is essentially ran in any deck that can make three monsters on the field consistently as a boss monster, since of course the 4000 attack is very admirable. However, their final monster is Arcana Force Extra, the Dark Ruler. Has the exact same stats and summoning conditions as the Light Ruler. However, the effects are different. If heads, this card can make a second attack during each battle phase, but if it does using this effect, change it to defense position, and its battle position cannot be changed until the end of your next turn. And if Tails, if this card is destroyed, destroy all cards on the field. And yeah, adding on to the Tails effect, the anime version had the exact same effect, all with the extra Dark Ruler getting himself revived during your next standby phase. So yeah, this is another very great example of a boss monster, and basically this is a bit of a more aggressive version of the Light Ruler. Makes sense, right? And yeah, this is the card that was used in Season 4 during that my most watched video. But yeah, like with the Light Ruler, this card is worth running, but only in decks which can afford to make it, which are decks which can spew out 3 monsters on the field effortlessly. So yeah, because both of these effects are actually very good. And now on to their back row. First of all, we have their field spell Light Barrier. During your standby phase, toss a coin. If the result is Tails, the following effects are negated until your next standby phase. When you summon an Arcana Force monster, choose which effect to apply without tossing a coin. If an Arcana Force monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you gain life points equal to the destroyed monster's original attack. Always run 3 and never any less. I cannot stress how important this card is to the Arcana Force playstyle, and it does require a coin toss in order for its effect to keep going. The set effect can be circumvented with stuff like second coin toss, and not to mention it's searchable by terraforming, which of course is limited, and same goes with Metaverse. But yeah, you basically run 3 of these, 1 Metaverse and 1 terraforming, and I've seen some players taking in a Planet Pathfinder here and there because the field spell is just that important. So yeah. And next up we have Arcana Reading, which is their newest piece of support, and it allows you to toss a coin and apply the appropriate effect, or if Light Barrier is in your field zone, you can choose which effect to apply without tossing a coin. If heads, you can add 1 card that has a coin tossing effect from your deck to your hand except Arcana Reading, and if tails, your opponent adds 1 card from their deck to the hand. You can banish this card from your graveyard immediately after this effect resolves. Normal summon 1 Arcana Force monster from your hand, and you can only use each effect once per turn. Okay, so this is essentially another 3-off staple, and you basically need to have Light Barrier in order to activate this thing, because the Tails effect is utterly ridiculous that I cannot put it into words. Letting your opponent search out anything is basically a death sentence for this archetype, and for basically, well, 80% of the decks, because letting your opponent search out literally any card in the entire game is simply too powerful. So yeah, but I will give credit for the heads effect to be able to add any coin toss related card from the archetype, which the archetype has plenty of, and not to mention that it also searches out non-archetypal cards such as second coin toss. So yeah, Arcana Reading is an essential 3-off staple. And now we move on to their final spell card, which is Cup of Ace. Toss a coin, and if heads, you draw 2 cards, and if tails, your opponent draws 2 cards. Needless to say, it's alright if providing you get the coin toss right, but if you actually have, if you're playing a deck out build, the tails effect doesn't tend to hurt either. So yeah, along with second coin toss, run it for some extra consistency. And now moving on to their back row, first of which we have Reversal of Fate, which is a trap card based around the Arcana 10 Wheel of Fortune. It allows you to select an Arcana Force monster you control. That monster's effect is now treated as the opposite coin toss effect. Now, I would really love this if this was a spell card, because the amount of need for this thing to exist in your deck is really bad, since of course Arcana Force monsters don't always tend to hit the field with the right effects, and it can be used as a quick conversion for in order to switch out the ruler's effects. So yeah, as it stands right now, you basically run 1 and 2 if you really feel like it. Next up we have Tour of Doom, which is a continuous trap based on Arcana 13 Death. And the effect is absolutely priceless. During your opponent's standby phase, toss a coin. If heads, your opponent cannot normal or flip summon until the end phase. And if tails, you cannot do it during your next turn. Well, it's very risky, but if you actually manage to pull off, it can cause such a massive slowdown to the opponent that it's simply priceless. Of course, if you also have a way of shutting down special summoning, and if light barrier is on the field, well, you basically accomplish this thing's anime effect, which is basically that you cannot summon in any shape or form if the heads effect is applied, and of course the same thing for the tails effect. So yeah, run it again if you really feel lucky. So yeah, it's now searchable by Arcana rating, so yeah. And their final card is Arcana Call, another normal trap. And it allows you to select an Arcana Force monster you control, remove from play 1 Arcana Force monster from either player's graveyard, and then till the end phase, the selected monster's effect becomes the removed monster's effect for the same coin toss result. Not sure what this was meant to accomplish, but there are so little relevant effects which you would want to use with this thing. Well, the only ones I can think of which are relevant is Temperance's heads effect, the Fool's tails effect, and I honestly can't think of anything else. Maybe if you actually have the world in your graveyard, and then you have 2 monsters to spare, and then you use this for a quick world lock in order to quickly finish off the opponent. But those are some very specific uses, and this basically makes the card worthless in any other scenario. And now it is time for the grades. In terms of consistency, well, Arcana reading is a thing, but it's still a coin toss related card, and you don't always have that light barrier. Terraforming is limited, Metaverse is limited. So yeah, and not to mention that there are not many cards which can actively boost up the fairy monsters of this caliber, so yeah, not good. 1 out of 3. Power. Their only legitimate monsters with high attack values are the Moon, the World, and the Rulers. The Rulers being near impossible to bring out, the World being ran in the decks exclusively based on the World lock, and the Moon being a bit too gimmicky to be considered competitively viable. The Honest exists, but you cannot always spare to use him, so that's a complete 1 out of 3. In terms of comeback ability, there absolutely is none. Literally none of the support card nor the generic stuff helps out, so 1 out of 3 there as well. In terms of protection, the only form of protection the archetype has is the Fool's targeting immunity, and of course the Light Ruler's targeting immunity, which of course is a bit too irrelevant to consider. And considering the fact that this is the archetype which purely operates on luck in getting your coin tosses right, this is absolutely the strongest 1 out of 3 I have ever had to give in the versatility department. So yeah, it's been a long while since I've had an archetype with a scale this bad that is not a tech archetype. So yeah, I am very distraught on how Arcana Force turned out, because I really had high hopes that this archetype would be a lot better than it initially seemed. It was on the legacy of the Worthless for a reason, so yeah. They really need to have like monsters with more monsters with the effects of the Rulers, like both of which help you out but in 2 different ways. And a much quicker conversion than Reversal of Fate, so yeah. And a better way to search out light barrier. Why not have the an Arcana Force monster which can basically search out Light Barrier on the way of volcanic rocket, or Harpy Queen, or Warrior of Atlantis. So yeah, there are really many ways you can improve this archetype, and I haven't even brought all of them up. So yeah. But anyway, that is going to wrap things up with this archetype analysis. Next time we'll be going on to the 5Ds era for archetype of the same length when judging by their card numbers, and after that I'll be having my 200th archetype analysis, and I prepared a very special archetype. Well, I plan to do it a bit later, but considering it's the 200th archetype analysis in 2 videos, I will do it then. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos and updates. Comment, like, and subscribe. As usual, I'll upload the next vid whenever I can. Be sure to check out my Patreon when you got the time. Maybe drop a few donations if you feel like it, and I'll see you all and have a good day. Peace.